Okay, so we can start by doing 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then I'll do one time the salutation. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, the fully enlightened one. Okay, so now we are beginning the spring 2026 semester of sutta study after a long break during the winter. Actually, not so much a break since we had the meditation program every Saturday, but we didn't do the sutta study. And so now, last year at the end of 2025, we finished the Book of Sevens in the Anguttara Nikaya. And now we are going to be working through the Book of Eights, the Attaka Nipata. Okay, and the okay, the first sutta in the Book of Eights, it's the 8 benefits of loving kindness. But I'm not going to deal with that sutta because there's another sutta, which is the counterpart to this in the Book of Elevens, in which the Buddha enumerates 11 benefits of loving kindness. And if you have the full Anguttara Nikaya and you're not willing to wait until we get to the Book of Elevens, you can look at that sutta. I think it's number, I don't remember the number, but it comes in the Book of Elevens. And that has become sort of the standard account of the benefits of loving kindness within the Theravada tradition. So within the Parita, the book of Parita chants, it's the sutta on 11 benefits of loving kindness that is the standard. So it's the same, it includes these 8, and then it adds 3 other benefits. So instead, we will be beginning with the sutta number 2, very important and valuable sutta on, it's titled Wisdom or Panya, and the theme of it, how is the size?
Yes, we can read it, Bante.
Okay, I can make it somewhat bigger.
Yes, that's
great.
better.
Yeah, thank you, Bante.
Okay, so the theme is called the wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life. And the Pali expression here, we have a note on this, is Adi Brahmacharya Ka. Actually, in the stem form is Adi Brahmacharya Ka Panya. And so the spiritual life is Brahmacharya, which, according to the commentary here, refers to the entire Noble Eightfold Path. And the commentary explains this wisdom as insight, which is the wisdom that is the basis or which is fundamental to the spiritual life of the path. So we could say that this is the wisdom that underlies, you could say, the wisdom that underlies the development of the Noble Eightfold Path, and the wisdom that arises as insight when the Noble Eightfold Path is brought to a high point of development. And so the Buddha is going to lay out here 8 causes and conditions, or 8 means for developing or acquiring this wisdom that is fundamental to the spiritual life. He says that these are the 8 causes that lead to obtaining this wisdom when it hasn't yet obtained, and for increasing, developing, maturing, and fulfilling this wisdom after it has been obtained. So it's interesting the way the Buddha makes this distinction here, that first we have to acquire this wisdom. So that would be sort of the initial acquisition of insight. And then once you acquire this insight, it's not sufficient just to be satisfied with it, but you have to go on cultivating it, increasing it, maturing it, and bringing it to fulfillment. And so we have 8 conditions that the Buddha is going to lay down for acquiring and maturing this wisdom. And so the first, the Buddha says, and he's speaking here in relation to monastics, but we could give it a broader application, really, to any dedicated practitioner. But here he says that the bhikkhu, the monk, lives in dependence on the teacher, and the Pali word uses the Pali text uses the word sutta, which really means the Buddha as the teacher. So he's speaking in his own time. So he's speaking about monks who are living in dependence on him. So that's why I capitalized teacher here, since it's Sutta is the founder of the teaching, which is the Buddha, or he lives in dependence on a certain fellow monk in the position of a teacher. So this is the usual way after the Buddha's passed away, or and through the generations, that one has to choose an elder monk who serves as the teacher, the acharya. Or it could be, we have actually 2 terms in Pali, upajjhaya and acharya. So in terms of the formal monastic life, the upajjhaya is what we translate as the preceptor, and that is the one who presides over one's ordination. And so one's primary obligation is to the preceptor. But the acharya is the one who gives one the actual teaching in day-to-day life, and the one who prepares one for ordination. And then generally after ordination, he's the one who guides one's development in the monastic life. And so here, the one who's serving in the position of a teacher, this could be either the upajjhaya, the preceptor, or the acharya. And the text says that one lives in dependence on the teacher or this monk in the position of the teacher. And this points to an important aspect in the Buddhist monastic life, that after you get ordained, as even after full ordination, one is supposed to live for 5 years, minimum 5 years, in a condition which is called nisaya, nisaya, which means dependence. That is, one is supposed to live under the guidance. Also, we could also translate this maybe as guidance or dependence. So one is supposed to live in dependence on a teacher, live under the guidance of one's teacher. And the teacher not only gives teachings in the sense of explaining the Dhamma, teaching the philosophical principles of Buddhism, not only teaching like the practices of meditation, but the teacher becomes really like the spiritual guide that sort of helps you develop in the monastic life, develop in the spiritual life. And so part of the task of the teacher is to look out for one's shortcomings and faults and to correct one's faults, sort of gently, ideally gently. Sometimes there are 2 kinds of teachers. One is the soft and gentle teacher. The other is the stern and strict teacher. So teachers have different characters, and sometimes the student will gravitate towards the kind of teacher that matches their own temperament. But ideally, the teacher should be somewhat strict in helping find one's faults, point out one's shortcomings, correct one's mistakes, but also out of compassion, teaching one the right way to behave, the right way to conduct oneself, and the right kinds of qualities that one has to develop. Yeah, there's actually some beautiful verses in the Dhammapada. So it says, this is in, I think it's the Pandita chapter, the chapter on the sage. Okay, I'm not going to search for it now. Okay, but it says that if you find a wise person who can discover your faults and point out your faults, you should follow such a person just as if you had discovered hidden treasure. Because the task in following the Buddhist life is we have to overcome our faults, which means faults in bodily conduct or in our actions, faults in our mental states, corrupt, defiled mental states, and our wrong views or misunderstandings. And so the teacher has to look out for one's shortcomings in one's conduct and sort of point out the mistakes, correct one, and guide one towards correct conduct, correct conduct in one's bodily conduct and in one's speech. Very important aspect of conduct is speech. And the teacher should also be able to sort of, doesn't have to be able to read your mind, but sometimes through your conduct and through your speech, the teacher will be able to determine, to discern what kind of states of mind are running through, what kind of states are running through your mind, and then point out those states and urge one to correct them. And also the teacher will point out the kind of good qualities that one has to develop. If the teacher sees you're weak, maybe you have a tendency to get angry easily, the teacher will not only correct you when you get angry, but he'll instruct you how to develop patience. If the teacher sees that you tend to get a little bit arrogant, proud, sometimes a good teacher will sometimes push you down so that you crush your pride and then you become humble. Of course, the teacher shouldn't do this in a nasty, denigrating way, but this, teachers can be quite sharply critical. I think one of the great masters of this was Ajahn Chah, who could be very, very stern with his pupils, but all of his pupils benefited immensely from his guidance. And then there was another teacher in Thailand. His name is Ajahn Mahabor, who is reputed to be an arahant. And he would sometimes scold his students really, it seems almost harshly. Whatever they would do, he would come to them and say, not good enough, not good enough. If they're sweeping, say, sweeping the Lexta Dharma Hall, he'll come to them, even though they seem to do a perfect job, he'll find out little specks of dust and then blast them for not perfectly cleaning out the hall. And so this is a way, he's not doing this because he's angry and he wants to damage the damage the mind of his students, but it's a way of, he'll probably do this only to those who are proud of themselves. So he'll criticize them harshly in order to cut down their pride. And then, of course, there will be sometimes the student will have wrong views or misunderstandings of the Dhamma. And in this case, it's the responsibility of the teacher to correct the understandings that the student has samaditi, right view. And so that is the value of living in dependence on a teacher. And that is why the Buddha has laid down sort of this rule that the student should live in dependence on his teacher for a minimum of 5 years. And sometimes a student will not be able to maybe connect or resonate with the particular teacher that they choose. And so they're still entitled to change their teacher. They should do it with the permission of their original teacher. But ideally, the student should live on dependence on a senior monastic for this period of 5 years. And it's said that when the student is living in dependence on the teacher, he should set up towards the teacher in relation to the teacher. The Buddha uses the expression, here first I'll use the English, then explain, a keen sense of moral shame and moral dread. And the two words here are hiri and otapa, and I'll come back to these. And then affection is pema, and reverence, garava. Oops. And it seems to me, this is my understanding, that we could divide, four qualities are mentioned, but we could divide these into two groups. And so the first two, hiri and otapa, are sort of the restraining factors, the factors that help one to overcome one's faults and shortcomings. And the other two, affection and reverence, are sort of the positive qualities that draw you to the teacher in a positive way. So it's through hiri and otapa, moral shame and moral dread, that in a way one shrinks back a little bit fearfully from the teacher, that one is careful in the presence of the teacher, and that one wants to really correct oneself and make sure that one is behaving in the proper way and affects. But if you just had a stern, sharp, critical teacher who's always pointing out one's shortcomings, blaming you, correcting you, then you lose interest in the spiritual life and the monastic life and just pull away and go back to enjoy the life in the world. So you need some kind of positive, attractive force that keeps you tied to that spiritual life and that drives you forward in developing the practice. And that is these two qualities, affection, because you really have to like the teacher. Even when the teacher criticizes you, corrects you, blames you, but you still have this deep affection for the teacher. And there are periods of warmth and a mutual delight in the Dhamma, a shared delight in the Dhamma. And then because of the qualities, the teacher embodies the kind of qualities that you admire and want to develop within yourself. And so you have this quality of reverence for the teacher. And the word garava is actually related to the word guru, which in the Indian tradition indicates that teacher for whom one has the greatest reverence and esteem. So the word guru originally means heavy or weighty. So it's that figure that serves, that has the most weight in one's life, the one that for whom you have the greatest reverence. And so the abstract noun reverence comes from guru. Okay, so it's through this dependence on the teacher, whether the Buddha himself during the Buddha's lifetime or some other monk or anybody else in the position of a teacher, so that by this quality of moral shame, which the word shame nowadays gets bad press since people go around shaming others, but that's not what is intended here, but rather moral shame means a particular, what I call the inner monitor, which keeps a check on one's behavior out of a sense of one's own inherent dignity, one's own intrinsic dignity. So one wants to preserve that sense of dignity, that sense of doing right for its own sake, and that monitor that ensures that one keeps on the right track in order to preserve one's intrinsic dignity. That is hiri. I can't find a better word for it. Some suggest conscience, but conscience has other connotations that might not work so well. So we just have to understand the Pali word in its own, by terms of it, by way of its own implications. And then the counterpart to hiri is ottappa, which is, I translate as moral dread. And this is explained as fear of the consequences of misconduct. And so we might take an example, say, in relation to the teacher. The student is dwelling in dependence on the teacher, and say, the student, he has his room, he's living in his room. The teacher is in his room, usually it's a larger room. And the student might see that the teacher, because he's a prominent teacher, he gets offerings of various items, including maybe he gets a box of high quality incense, maybe Japanese incense. I think I've told that the Chinese set a very high store on Japanese incense, right? And so let us say the teacher has various boxes of incense, and the student sees a box of Japanese incense, and he just has his ordinary incense in his room, and he likes the Japanese incense. And so when the teacher isn't looking, the box of Japanese incense is very tempting. And the student might say, oh, my teacher, he has many boxes of incense. He's not going to miss a box of Japanese incense. And so that thought comes into his mind, but then it could be that Hiri steps into the picture and says, it's not right for you to steal from your teacher when he's not aware of it. If you do that, you're going to be really a kind of disgrace to your teacher. So that is Hiri. And so the student might give up the thought of stealing the Japanese incense from hiri, the sense of moral shame. But also, ottappa kicks into the picture when the student thinks, oh, if I take the box of incense, my teacher might find out about it. He'll be looking around. He sees maybe he really cherished that box of incense. He was planning to start using it the next day. He sees the incense is missing. And then maybe he'll draw a group of students together and say, I had a box of incense. Japanese incense is missing. Who has taken it? And then you might feel this would be the sense of shame coming up. Then you have to stand up and say, I took it. But then you're afraid the teacher is now going to start criticizing you in front of the whole group of disciples. Then from dread of that, from fear of that, you decide, I'm not going to steal the incense. So that is ottappa. So that's the distinction. Okay, so this is the first condition that leads to obtaining the wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life. Okay, now we go on to the second. Okay, so now the text continues and says that when you're living in dependence on the teacher, after setting up this keen sense of hiri affection and reverence, then, and this is important, one should approach them from time to time and inquire, how is this, Bhante, Venerable? What is the meaning of this? So this is the way that one is now sort of actively engaged in the process of developing wisdom, because you want to understand the points in the Dhamma. So this is supposing maybe the teacher has assigned you some particular text to study, to read and to study, or given a discourse and some questions have arisen. And so then you ask questions about to find out, to understand the text or the discourse at a deeper level, to get to the essence of it, to clear up one's doubts, one's perplexities, misunderstandings. And so then this text goes on and says that the venerable ones, the teacher, preceptor, will disclose what has not been disclosed. So any points that you've not learned before, the teacher will teach them. And then he will clear up what is obscure. So if you don't understand something clearly, the teacher maybe will explain in more detail and dispel one's perplexity, one's doubts about numerous perplexing points. And what I find interesting here is this particular phrase, clearing up what is obscure, because one thing that I've found myself in reading the Nikayas is that sometimes, very often, you'll find short suttas which might just enumerate a number of points. And you can't really, you just know the terms, know the expressions, but you're not able to understand them in detail. And maybe you don't have a teacher to turn to, or maybe you do have a teacher to turn to, and the teacher doesn't have to explain them in detail. But if the teacher knows the text well, he'll say, well, here you find this summary account, short account in this sutta, but go to Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 22, sutta number 56, and then you'll find that point elaborated in detail. So sometimes the teacher doesn't have to explain in detail himself, but he'll point out what are the suttas that you turn to find the concise points elaborated so that you get a fuller explanation. Okay, so this is a way of developing a kind of foundational wisdom, and technically one will call this sutta mai panya. So this is the wisdom that arises from listening, from hearing. So in ancient times, before the texts were written down, you have to go to the teacher to hear, to learn the Dhamma through verbal transmission. And so the teacher explains. And so in this way, by inquiring and investigating the teaching, then one gains wisdom that arises from listening to the teaching. Nowadays, we get this wisdom through, because we have printed books, by the study of the printed texts. but we can't rely only on our own reading, but we have to get often explanations and clarifications from qualified teachers who will explain the meaning and the purpose of the text. So this is the second condition for developing the wisdom pertaining to the holy life. Okay, the third, and in my view, this seems a bit out of place in my opinion, but first I'll deal with it and then say why it seems out of place. So it says, having heard that Dhamma, the Dhamma expounded by the teaching, he resorts to two kinds of withdrawal or seclusion. So one is called withdrawal in body, and the second is withdrawal in mind. So a different word is used for withdrawal here. I don't remember the Pali, but the usual Pali word is viveka, which is what I translate as seclusion. And so in order to develop one's practice sort of more intensively, first one has to engage in bodily seclusion, which in the monastic life means that one goes off in the old times, one would go into the forest or to the foot of a tree, to an open space, or at least going to what they call a kuti. This would be a little hut or a cottage or private room where you can practice meditation without being disturbed by others. So that is bodily withdrawal, which is called kaya viveka. And then the ideal through kaya viveka is to obtain seclusion of mind, which is chitta viveka. And that means that through diligent practice, the mind is able to withdraw from its entanglement with outer objects and mundane concerns and withdraw into itself and then experience the piti and sukha, the joy and happiness and tranquility that comes through deeper engagement with the meditation practice. So it seems to me that this, as I said, is a bit out of place. It seems to me more appropriate that this should come in the seventh place rather than the third. Because here we have now, it seems, going back to more basics. So we have number 4 is that one is virtuous, one dwells restrained by the patimokkha. This is the code of monastic precepts. One is possessed of good conduct and resort, and one sees danger in minute faults. And then having undertaken the sikkhapada, these are the training rules or precepts, one trains in them. So this is the 4th cause and condition. So this is really laying down a foundation of sila. So it's pointing to sila. And for the monastic, sort of the basic code that helps to establish sila is the patimokkha, the compendium of monastic rules. And really, in following the precepts or the silas, one does so out of those 2 qualities mentioned earlier, hiri, the sense of moral shame, and ottappa, the sense of moral dread. Okay, then based on sila, now here we come to learning. So this is acquiring the knowledge or understanding of the Dhamma. Again, this one seems to partly overlap with number 2. So here one has learned much remembers what one has learned, and accumulates what one has learned. And he says those teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, with the right meaning and the right phrasing, which proclaim the pure brahmacharya or holy life. These teachings, one has learned much of, retained in mind, recited verbally, mentally investigated, and penetrated well by view. And here, this is interesting. We have here actually in this standard formula, which we find again and again, particularly in the Anguttara Nikaya, we have a kind of five-fold process of spiritual education. So first, one has to learn the teachings. And in the ancient times, the way you learn the teachings is by hearing them. Of course, you don't have printed books, but you go to the teacher to listen to them. Of course, nowadays you can read them in books. Then you retain them in mind. Again, when there are no printed books, you have to memorize the teachings, either verbally or at least memorize the principles of the teaching. And yeah, even today, there are monks who memorize whole books of teaching. My own teacher in Sri Lanka, Venerable Ananda Maitreya, had memorized several of the Nikayas, I think. And the way he learned English, he spoke fluent English. And the way he got to speak fluent English, he had had some correspondence with Mrs. Rhys Davids, who was the wife of Professor Rhys Davids. Professor Rhys Davids was the founder of the Pali Text Society, and his wife, Mrs. Rhys Davids, was also a Pali scholar and translator. And my teacher had correspondence with Mrs. Rhys Davids, and she sent him, I think she sent him the English translation of the Samyutta Nikaya. And the way he perfected his English was by memorizing the English translation of the Samyutta Nikaya. Yeah, so monks like this, and there are some who even, especially in Burma, who can memorize the entire Tripitaka. If you remember, Chris, at the Lincoln Memorial, among the speakers, there was a Burmese monk, Gundamala was his name. Yeah, that monk I had met in Sri Lanka 2006. And when he spoke at the Lincoln Memorial, I thought his name was familiar. And so when he finished speaking, then he was passing me. I said, "Excuse me, were you in Sri Lanka in 2006?" He said, "Yeah, we met there." Yeah, so he is a Tripitaka Dara, which means that he's memorized the entire Pali Tripitaka. How they test them, I don't know, but he's considered a Tripitaka Dara, one who's memorized the whole Tripitaka. So you retain it in mind, and then to ensure that it remains in mind, you recite verbally. So that is the third stage, recitation. Then the fourth stage is to investigate sort of intellectually in order to get a clear conceptual understanding of the teaching. So if you just memorize and recite, you could do so like a tape recorder without understanding. But this is to ensure that you get understanding, you investigate the teaching, and then you have to develop insight into the teaching, penetrating it by view. So this is the fifth cause and condition for obtaining this wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life. But then having acquired this learning and on the basis of sila or disciplined conduct, then one has to undertake the mental training. Excuse me. So this is applying energy in training the mind by abandoning the unwholesome qualities, the defiled qualities, and acquiring wholesome qualities, acquiring them and developing them, maturing them until they become the powerful, dominant forces in the mind. And so one is strong, firm in exertion, not being negligent and neglecting the duty of cultivating wholesome qualities. So this is really the practice of right effort, samavayama. And then the seventh, again, this seems a little bit out of place, since I would expect this to come earlier. But anyway, we'll just take it where it comes. So here it says, in the midst of the Sangha, he does not engage in rambling and pointless talk. And the text is not explicit here. Can I open this? But there are other passages. Yeah. Oh, very small. Let me make it big. Yeah, so other passages, particularly in the Majjhima Nikaya, give a more detailed explanation of what is meant by this pointless talk. So let us get it. So it's talk, talk of kings. Nowadays it would be talk about presidents, prime ministers, talk of robbers, ministers, armies, dangers, battles. But really nowadays, sometimes to really have a proper ethical perspective, sometimes you do have to talk about presidents, armies, and battles, but not as a kind of rambling or idle way. Food, drink, I like this, I like that, clothing, beds, garlands, perfumes, relatives. Of course, sometimes you have to talk about your relatives. Vehicles, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana. No, that's not intended. But I have to say, nowadays amongst monks, there's a lot of talk about vehicles. Villages, towns, cities, countries, women, who are the beautiful women, villages, uh, heroes, streets, wells, the dead, trifles, the origin of the world, the origin of the sea, whether things are like this or like that. Okay, so on the positive side, the Buddha says that one is supposed to speak about the Dharma, or if one isn't going to speak on the Dharma oneself, in the midst of a Sangha, one could request somebody else to give a Dhamma talk, or if one is not going to speak at all, one should adopt Arya Tuni Bhava, this noble silence. So that is the seventh cause and condition for acquiring this wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life. And so then we come to the eighth cause and condition, which this is the actual insight, which is that wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life. And this is the reason why I said that number 3 this seclusion of body and of mind, it seems that the appropriate place for that would be in the seventh place, because that is sort of the going off into seclusion to practice meditation and contemplation. And then on the basis of that seclusion, then one will develop the insight. This is the insight into the impermanence of the five aggregates. So here he says one dwells contemplating, arising, and vanishing in these five aggregates, which are the basis of clinging. So we know the five aggregates are material form, bodily form, feeling, perception and ideation, volitional activities, and consciousness. And so one dwells contemplating the arising and vanishing, or the origin and passing away in regard to these five aggregates. So usually one begins by focusing on, because it's easier to grasp on the bodily form when the mind becomes still, focused, concentrated, then one will start investigating through the body until one picks up the sense of the subtle processes in the body and being able to see the arising and passing away of bodily phenomena. So the way we did it during the winter, you could start off with the breath, for example, noticing in-breath is one thing. It rises, it occurs, it stops. The out-breath arises, proceeds, it stops. So then one is observing arising and passing in the in and out breathing. Then you could attend more closely to even to the in-breath, and you'll see different phases of arising and passing in the in-breath, attending more closely to the out-breath, discerning different phases of arising and passing in the out-breath. And then you could extend that awareness to the whole body till you see the body as in a constant process of arising and passing away. And then you could direct the attention to the feeling, usually starting with the bodily sensations, observing their arising and passing away, and then observing all feelings, mental and bodily feelings, arising and passing away. Then to perception, especially through the process of ideation, observing how ideas arise and vanish, arise and vanish. Then to the volitional activities, all the acts of will, intentions, purposes, formations of the mind arising and passing, and even the consciousness, the bare awareness in the background arises and passes away. And so that is seeing that insight into impermanence, which then will lead to the impermanent, into the insight into the unsatisfactory nature of the five aggregates, and then to the insight into the anatta, or non-self nature of the five aggregates. So those three, the insight or contemplation of impermanence, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, anatta, non-self. So those are the three insights that will eventually lead to the world transcending path and the fruit and the fulfillment of the Buddha's path. So those are the 8 conditions that lead to the acquiring the wisdom fundamental to a holy life. And then the rest of the sutta, we don't have to deal with the rest of the sutta. You could read it on your own, but it just goes on to explain how when one acquires those 8 conditions, then one's fellow monks esteem one for each of these conditions. And then we have just the conclusion. So those are the 8 causes and conditions that lead to the wisdom fundamental to the spiritual life. Okay, I think we want to leave a little time for questions. I don't want. So the way to ask the questions is to go to the hand symbol and you click that, and then I will take the questions. So I see already Gita, and I have to say, please, when you ask the question, always try to keep the question concise, simple and concise. So Gita?
Thank you, Bante, for the teachings. That was fabulous. Welcome back. It's wonderful to have you back in class. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Bante, I have a question on this is not really on the topic, but it was something that's in my mind. Rice Davis, I.B. Horner, and F.L. Woodward did the original translation of the Tripitaka, the canon, into English. I have
This
the
is
collection.
the original translation of what?
Into English, right? The Pali Canon, when they with Wisdom Publications originally, how did they get the scriptures? Was my question. Because that was the first set that was available. Because when I bought it, I bought the entire set and I started reading it.
Of
But
the
I
English,
didn't know. Yeah, the
the
English translation.
by
Sutta Pitaka,
I.B. Horner, F.L.
F.L. Woodward,
Woodward.
and Rice Davis.
There was the Miss
Reese
Dr.
Davis.
and Mrs. Reese Davids, and there
Yeah,
was E.M. Hare. Yeah, they
yeah,
would
him
have.
too.
This is what the work that was done, the magnificent work that was done by the Pali Text Society. They obtained the the manuscripts, the handwritten manuscripts in at that time called Ceylon. They got some from Burma. Other, I wonder whether they were printed.
Or
I'm
were they like
There
in the
could have been
leaves, the
some
original?
printed edition, but they did get the manuscripts, the Ola leaf or palm leaf manuscript.
Yes, the Ola leaves. Where did they
Yeah.
get that from? Sri Lanka or
Oh,
India?
they got them from all three, at least the three, maybe four
Countries?
Theravada countries. From Sri Lanka, at
Sri
that
Lanka,
time called
Burma,
Ceylon, from
yeah,
Burma,
India.
Thailand, and maybe they got some from Cambodia as well.
Oh, that's
And
incredible.
sometimes
I
they
was
got
always curious.
Yeah, sometimes they got from different parts of, say, Burma or different monasteries in Sri Lanka. So they would have different versions, which they compared.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Thanks,
well,
Bante,
it's
for sharing that.
extremely important, valuable work that they did. Yeah.
Yeah, I have it. I have the hardcover
Yeah.
books, which I read. Yeah, thank you, Bante.
Okay, then I say Chaya. Then you
Um,
want to do?
Thank you, Bante. Thank you for the teaching. Bante, my question also is not related to today's sutta, but the previous one and on loving kindness and the one in the Book of 11s. So, Bante, there's a collection of these protective chants in Sri Lanka called like Mahapiritputta or the
Yeah,
Great Book
yeah,
of
yeah,
Chanting. So, I've been studying it a little bit. And it seems to me that the collection is from different places in this in the canon.
yeah.
And I was wondering whether like how were they compiled and like who came up with this particular collection? Can you comment on that one thing?
Yeah, that I don't know. It was probably done during the medieval period. So, maybe for people who are not familiar, I'll explain. There's a group of suttas which are considered, they call them parita. The word parita means protection. It's based on the Sanskrit paritrana, which means protection. So these are suttas that are considered to have maybe some special protective force, or maybe they're considered just important texts to be constantly recited in order to impress them on the mind. And so we have the very concise parita are basically three suttas that are usually chanted in monasteries every day. So these are the Mangala Sutta, the Ratana Sutta, and the Metta Sutta. So those are the sort of basic Parita suttas. But there's a bigger book called the Parita book or Mahaparit. I think it's called Mahapariputta or Chatubana Pota, 4 recitation sections. So that collects, it brings together a number of these important suttas from, yeah, I think there are some from the Digha Nikaya, from the Majjhima Nikaya, I don't remember, but a lot of them are from the Khuddaka Nikaya, and then some from the Sutta Nipata, some from the Anguttara Nikaya. And then there are a number of additional chants, blessing chants, and so on. And then even in the medieval period, in some versions, they added some, basically they're like dharanies or mantras they added to them. Yeah, so when it was compiled, I really don't know. Probably I would say my guess, perhaps during the Polonnaruwa period, or it could be during the, I don't know, the Kandyan period, the period of the Kandy kings. I just don't know.
Thank you, Bante. That's useful. I thought
Probably,
that
yeah.
they,
What I would say, okay, I tell you how to find out. Do you know Google's AI program called Gemini?
yes, Bante.
You put in the question, when was the Sri Lankan Parita book compiled? Uh,
Yes, Bante, I will do that.
I'm sure last night, a friend of mine, his name is John Kelly, he lives in Australia, he teaches Pali. He sent me a question about a very subtle point concerning a particular pronoun used in a sutta. And I was about to turn in for bed. I thought I don't want to start thinking about this question. So I just thought out of a joke, I just put the question into Google Gemini, expecting the answer I expected to get would be from Gemini saying, I'm sorry, but I don't have the resources to provide answers to settle questions on matters of Pali grammar like this. That was the answer that I expected to get. But within 2 seconds, it gave me like a 5 paragraph explanation of the function of that pronoun in that sentence, which I'm sure Gemini had never had that question asked before. But somehow, I don't know how it did it, but it brought together all of the sort of information stored in its circuits and came up with 5 paragraph explanation of just a 1 word pronoun. He was asking why the neuter pronoun young was used rather than the masculine pronoun yo. And Gemini explained in detail.
Thank you, Bante. That's
It,
amazing.
yeah, yes. Okay, well, we'll take one more question, then we'll have to go up. So this will be Jack. Oh, somebody in New York. So Jacqueline?
Yes, Bante, thank you so much for the great class. Since we do have all these suttas available being written, is there a recommended order to read them or some kind of a syllabus?
Okay, yeah, what I recommend, and I'm not doing this to promote myself, but do you have the book In the Buddha's Words?
Yes, Bante, I've read it.
Oh, you have read it. Okay. So that's what I recommend for somebody not yet familiar with the suttas. So after that, what I suggest generally is the Majjhima Nikaya. But I have, if you go to the website of Bodhi Monastery, New Jersey, because I did it when I was living there from 2003 to 2006, 2007. I did a course on the Majjhima Nikaya, and I reordered the suttas in a more meaningful pattern. Because in the Majjhima Nikaya itself, I don't know what kind of system the compilers use to put the suttas together. It's almost arbitrary, usually just a key word or stylistic feature will be the basis for organizing the suttas. So it's not a really meaningful order. So I reordered them. At least I think I did 50 or 60 suttas. And you find the outline in the website of Bodhi Monastery, New Jersey, because there are a lot of Bodhi monasteries. You have to get the one in Lafayette, New Jersey. Then I think you go to the teachings, and then there'll be audio teachings, since at that time we didn't have video. And then you'll find my course in the Majjhima Nikaya, where we go from very basic teachings to sort of more complex and more advanced teachings.
Wonderful, Bhante. Thank you so much. I see someone has put the link in the chat.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's good. That's useful.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to have to end for the, excuse me. To end for the morning, so we're going to do the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the Dhamma protecting devas and the nagas or dragon spirits, and then with all beings. Akasa ta chabuma ta deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasa ta chabuma ta deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasa ta chabuma ta deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Dukapata chani duka baya pata chani baya soka pata chani soka hantu sabe pipani no. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we're going to end with 3 bows to the Buddha. So I'll stand up. So we can stand up.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah, we're not, wait.
Sadhu.
No, we still have to do the bows.
Thank you, Bhante, and bow to Bhante Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay,
Thank you,
so thank you,
Bhante.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bhante.
Thank you, dear Bhante.
Thank you,
Enjoy
Bhante.
the
Good
lunch,
lunch,
Bhante. Good to
Bhante.
see you.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you,
everyone.
Bhante.
Thank
you,
See you on
Bhante.
Wednesday, Bhante. Take care. Have a
Bhante.
good weekend.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.